Okay, hi everyone. And first of all, I want to second something I guess a number of people have said today. I'm surprised and very happy to see all of you here. This is a lot of people from a lot of different countries. I know this has been said already, but standing up here just again, thanks for coming, and I hope you're hearing things that you're not getting elsewhere, and that should be and ought to be provocative. And should be and ought to be not simply accepted and you put it in your pocket and walk away. You should have questions and you should have challenges to this. And one of the things that should strike you as odd, I mean, you've been getting this in a number of the talks. Dr. Gate talked about this at the beginning. Alan has talked about it. Yaron has talked about it in the question marks. I mean, the title of this talk is The Evil of Altruism. That's an awfully strong statement, that it's evil. You can get from some of the discussions that have been going on, yeah, I can get that there's something sort of problematic about it. Something like, yeah, that there's something problematic about it. But the notion that it's evil, I think that takes a little bit more work to see and to figure out why Ayn Rand would classify it as evil. How many of you, you get in a lot of these hand-raising stuff, which I normally don't like. I always feel like I'm in high school. But how many of you want to be happy? I mean, how many of you want to be happy? How many of you want to find love, like romantic love in life, and make that a part of your life? How many of you guys want to fill your life with things that are meaningful to you personally? Okay. What's wrong with you? That was a joke. But of course you do. Why is this regarded as a moral ideal? Why? Now you might individually not think, yeah, that's my ideal. I want to be like them. But nonetheless, but what do you say about that? So in the culture, these individuals, and the gentleman on the left, you probably recognize, is Jesus of Nazareth, and I don't know which side of this, on the left that way, is Mother Teresa of Calcutta. They're commonly brought up as exemplars of morality, paradigms of morality. When you want to bring out, I'm not Mother Teresa, it's like the idea is they're being brought forward as this is an exemplar of what morality is, a moral ideal should be. And can you think of any other moral paradigm? Like who else would you wheel out? And I don't know. As I was preparing this talk, I've given different versions of this talk a couple of times, and as I was preparing for it, it's like it really strikes me as we don't have another moral ideal. I mean, there are things that we find admirable in people. There are characteristics, intelligence, independence, things like that. You can admire people like that, and people bring up Bill Gates and so on. There are things that are admirable about people like that, people of productive ability, people of integrity, and so on. And you may know people like that. You may be someone like that, right? And admire yourself in a bit for that, the things that you bring and the things that you represent. But it's less an issue of admiring somebody for moral reasons. If you think about what you admire or taught to think to admire from a moral perspective, it's this kind of stuff. And why are these individuals, why are these figures symbolic of morality? Notice they're not symbolic of altruism. Well, they are, but they're symbolic of morality. And in essence, it's why. What do they do? That's a real question. They sacrifice. I mean, a sacrifice, this has been practiced for a long time. Usually you take something valuable and you ritually sacrifice it. You kill it, you give it up, surrender it, usually for a higher being to propitiate a higher power or so on or whichever. But it's something that you give up. It's a loss. And of course, Mother Teresa is there. She spent her life, ministering to the poor and so on in India. And she was miserable. But why are these held up to us for moral admiration? We're supposed to emulate them. And I want to say a few things about the notion of sacrifice, because I've said that what they're really brought forward as moral exemplars is because they represent sacrifice. I mean, it's often just like, well, Jesus sacrificed for our sins, right? So we're supposed to sacrifice and emulate his model and so on. But just to reiterate, what sacrifice means, it's the surrender of a higher value for the sake of a lower value or a non-value. So it's a trade down, not a trade up. And there are a lot of things that we do in life. They say, you know, I sacrificed a lot to get to where I am. And I think that is a misconception. I don't think that's the right way to think about what a sacrifice is. And I don't think that's a semantic issue. Well, you can use the term how you want. It's a trade up. So if I spend a lot of nights studying for my PhD to get to where I wanted to be, because I know you want to be a professor, you got to get a certain sort of background, and I knew I wanted to be a philosopher. There's a whole background of what I wanted to achieve, and there are steps to get there. And it required a lot of work and so on, and a lot of things. I'd rather be doing something else right now, but I have to devote myself to these kind of things. But that's a trade up, or at least that's how I thought of it, right? Because this is something I really want to achieve. It's something more important to me. So I'm willing to give up these things. It's a net gain, or at least that's the aim, right? You could find out there. I don't like philosophy. That's not what I want to do, right? But this is the aim. This is the focus. Whereas a sacrifice is a net loss. It's you're giving up something. If you spend a lot of money on medicine to save your wife, whom you love, that's not a sacrifice. If your wife is more important to you than the money you spent on the medicine. If you let your wife die so you can save a stranger, that's a sacrifice. That's a trade down. That's a net loss for you. And so what altruism, I mean, it literally means otherism. We've been talking a lot. Alon just talked a lot about selfishness, and egoism means I-ism. You can put it as selfism, right? The central focus is on the self. It's on you. It's on yourself. And altruism just means otherism. It means living for others. It means placing the interests of others above your own. When they come into conflict, it's like your interests versus the interests of others. You sacrifice your own interests. Altruism is often like sacrifice and like selfishness. There are these terms that get mingled together with other concepts. So, as Alon talked about, and Yaron did as well, selfishness. And there was a question about that toward the end, and we can get into that at the question period if you want. But on the issue of selfishness, it's the packaging together in all of your minds of concern with one's own interests with evil. That's what so she's picking a fight when she says, I'm trying to redeem the concept selfishness. I'm going to write a damn book, The Virtue of Selfishness. And I'm going to put it in people's faces. You should not be, we need to break that association. Now you might think the concern with one's own interest is evil, and so you can have an argument about that. But she thinks that that's not the right way to package it. And you shouldn't be thinking the self, evil, and holding that together as some kind of a unit. And similarly with the altruism. When often if you talk about altruism or just look it up in the dictionary, often you'll get is, it's kindness, benevolence, goodwill. Now these are all nice things. But none of them are essentially connected. None of them are at all connected to self-sacrifice. I'm kind, I'm benevolent, I'm generous with my time. I mean, I'm a teacher. I have office hours. We have a little half-hour office hour blocks and stuff. I'll spend an hour sometimes. Sometimes I'll spend an hour and a half. Partly it's because I have a promising student, somebody who's really interested, they want to learn, and I spend more time than they have reason to expect, given the relationship, right? And that's an act of generosity. Is that self-sacrifice? Not on my part, not given how I feel about the program, not how I feel about my job and the ideas I'm trying to communicate and the interest that the students have. But altruism, you get packaged. It's this living for others, sacrificing for others. That's the moral. You turn away from the self. It's the anti-self packaged together with being nice to people. And that's a real problem because, from objectivism's perspective, that's a real problem. because her view is altruism is evil. And to couple it together with it's being nice to people, it's being kind, it gives it it candy coats it in a way. Because then if you say, oh, so you're against altruism? Like what, do you just slam the door in people's face? Is that what you do? You don't think you should be kind or benevolent? And the problem is the association of the two. You take one is perfectly rational, and you stick it with something life-destroying. And you hold it as one package. Then you can't think, it's a broken concept. It's like you have a tool, and it doesn't work. You can't think straight with it. It's the same thing with selfishness. You have an HR, human resources, right? You have an HR file. And you think about somebody like Steve Jobs, who's a creator, and you think about somebody like Bernie Madoff, who's a swindler. And you say to yourself, look, Bernie Madoff was going after a bunch of stuff for himself. Steve Jobs was going after a bunch of stuff for himself. Let's put these two people in the same file. What's HR going to do with the employees in that file? You can't do anything with that file. You have a dishonest crook with no integrity who's out to screw people over. And on the other hand, you want somebody who's a passionate, innovative creator who wants to build things that we love to buy. You can't deal with these employees as if that you put them in one box and it's like, well, what do you think of the people? What do you think of the people in that folder? What's your evaluation of the people in that folder? You can't say. There's no way to think with that. And the same thing with altruism. You can't think with broken concepts. Concepts are tools. They're man-made. We create them. We put them together to integrate our knowledge. And that's not an integration. I'm pointing to a slide down here. But that's not an integration. Being nice to people, throwing your life away. So that's just some clarification around some of the terms. So let's just go back and get a load of this. How many of you want to live like that? What's wrong with you? Now you may kind of, you kind of chuckle, yeah, maybe chuckle uncomfortably. But if you may not buy that as an ideal and think of it, that's my ideal, that's what I'm aiming at. And this seems a little extreme because the guy's on the cross, for Christ's sake. And I don't hold that as like that's an aspiration of mine. But nonetheless, we often don't know what to say to that. So yeah, I don't buy that, I don't live like that, but like, what am I going to say that's wrong? I mean, he's sacrificing for people. You're going to come out against that? And then they're a little uncomfortable because it's like, yeah, well, I don't want to do it. But then what? What's your alternative? So you throw out altruism out of the right pocket. What do you got in the left pocket? Where's your other ideal? And we don't really have one. That's because we care about our lives. To some extent, maybe in a kind of broken halfway way, or maybe fully, but this is where life is. Life is when you think about what's worthwhile in your life, what's meaningful to you personally in life, what makes life worth living, all the things if you were stranded on an island or if you thought you were dying soon, all of the things you'd think, damn it, that's what I would miss. I'll never be able to have that again, experience it. That won't be in my life. You don't think, I'll have to give up suffering. I'll have to give up self-sacrifice. No, you think I'll have to give up all the values that make my life worth living. And so there's a good reason why we don't aspire to being a guy on a cross or to, washing people's feet for 30 years. We don't want to do it because we're after values. And if we care about our lives, if we have an ounce of self-esteem, we should recoil at this idea that your moral ideal is total self-sacrifice, or even a little. But part of the issue of self-esteem is the fact that self-esteem is related to morality. If you don't think you are good, you're not going to have the self-confidence or the self-esteem to stand up for yourself, to fight for things that you think that are important, even when the society say, no, you shouldn't do that, and the family say, no, you stay home, take care of the family, don't go off and do that job that you want to do, and you're thinking of yourselves, well, it's kind of wrong of me to just be selfish and do what I want. And it's like, well, who am I? And it's like, so it's, altruism has gotten people to the point where when they think of the pro-me, the things that are important to me, they think there's something a little off about it. They might not think it's evil, but they'll think that there's something a little, what's the word, problematic about it, about this. Or they say, well, that you're too much focused on your own life, too much focused on your own values. And this is a really tragic problem. And I've written an article about this. This isn't exactly a plug for the article, but it's a good image. I wrote an article called The Suffering of Moral Saints, and it deals with a philosophical problem that altruism raises. And I'm not the one that coins the term moral saints. There was an article written, anyway, a long time ago. And the article was partly about a philosophic problem, but as it comes up in a particular book, there's a book called Strangers Drowning. And I read this book about a year and a half ago, and the whole book is about people who take altruism seriously, like full on, and they try to implement this as an idea in their lives. They spend their lives, their time, the moments of the hours and days of their lives, their energies, their money, their resources, to try to devote as fully as possible to serving others, to living for others, you live in a leper colony, give away your kidneys to strangers. And it's disturbing. Now, the author thinks that this is admirable and so on, but what she does, and I think does well, is she brings out, but these people make us feel pretty damn uncomfortable. And partly because we accept some aspect of this as an ideal. We can't come out against self-sacrifice. And yet, we don't want to live like that. Like, that's kind of crazy. And yet, who's going to come out against self-sacrifice? And the problem, this problem of moral saints is this. If you have altruism as an ideal, if you try to be idealistic about it, you try to practice the ideal consistently, you want to be fully good, what do? You throw your life away. You take everything that's important to you personally and you set that aside for the sake of whatever else somebody else wants, whatever somebody else happens to need. Give your kid's kidney to somebody. It's really, that is kind of from the perspective where you get Ayn Rand talking about that altruism is evil. It's anti-value, it's anti-life. What life requires is the pursuit of values, the achievement of them, the securing of them, the enjoyment of them, the use of them. All of it is about securing, enjoying values because you need them. And this is about their loss. Altruism is about their loss. So here's what's tragic about this. If you want to be fully moral, you've got to throw away your life. But if you want to live your life and live it to the fullest, you can't be moral. So it sets up this dichotomy, in Rand's view, a false dichotomy, and a tragic one, between the demands of morality and the demands of life. So that to the extent that you try to pursue your own interests, well, then you feel guilty. Or you're always open, perpetually, to the criticism that you're not doing enough, right? Okay, I gave 10% of my money to charity this year, let's say. Why not 12? Why not 15? Why not 50? Why not 75? And the only argument to that is going to be, well, there are other things I want to do with that money. But then they're like, who are you? Who are you to prioritize those things over what other people need? Think of the people in Africa or whatever. They're suffering, and so it's that. And it's from that kind of perspective that you can get a moral philosopher like Peter Singer, who's an Australian moral philosopher, a utilitarian, somebody asked about that, who has the gall to say to Bill Gates, who's given, $30 billion of his wealth away to charity, 30,000 million of his personal wealth to charity, and can ask, but has he done enough? Yeah, right. But from a philosophic perspective, it's like there's no answer to that. And he has every right to ask that question if you don't challenge the ideal. I mean, it would be nice if somebody would come in and say, yeah, I totally reject that ideal. If I give something to charity, it's because I have a personal cause that I think is really important. I can afford it. It's not sacrificial. And in some way, I find that it advances goals that I say that these are really important to me, and they're meaningful to my life. They provide something of an enhancement to my life, something I'm devoted to, something that I personally think is really important. And it's not about sacrifice. It's not about duty. It's about advancing values that you think. I mean, you just think about the sort of random giving I find very frustrating. I don't know exactly what some of these charities do, so don't quote me, but I just give a whole bunch of money to United Way or I don't know, whatever it is, and they just do things with it. That makes no sense to me, and I don't think that's actually value-driven. I don't think it's really focused on something that's important to you. When you think about the kind of, I didn't mean to bring this up, but the kind of, a bunch of you guys are on scholarship here. Why do you think we do that? So we can be Mother Teresa? No, the idea is we're trying to spread a certain kind of ideas that are radical, they're controversial, they don't often get a good hearing, they don't often get a fair hearing. And we know people, there is some interest, some kind of brewing interests around the world, and people don't have the money to just run around the world and travel like on the jet set life, No, they cost money and it's hard to do, and we try to bring people in and help to advance our own goals, to advance our own causes. I think these ideas are important. I want to share them. They've helped my life enormously. I think they can help yours. So I find this is a way of advancing my values. So when you think about people that are donating to things, there's nothing, the idea of donating to something that's a cause that you think is important, that's not the idea of that's wrong. Objectivism says that's wrong, you shouldn't do any of that. That's not right. But you have to put your money where your values are, and you have to establish that you've got real values, that they actually do enhance or they support in some way your own life and what you think is meaningful, rationally meaningful. And just, this is an aside, but I just have to say this. Helping others is not a valid moral category. Helping others is the good. Helping which others? For what reason? For how long? In support or in honor of which values? There are people you shouldn't help. There are causes you shouldn't support. And there are certainly things where, people are suffering through no cause of their own, but it's not your business. So Ayn Rand gets this idea that, she gets this reputation. She's callous, she's hard-hearted. It's a cruel philosophy because it's, go it alone or die on the street or something, and nobody dies on the street. But it's not that one doesn't feel some kind of a sympathy toward people who, especially those who suffer unjustly. But the idea is, what we're trying to move it away from is that this is an issue of duty, that one just is under. These duties are sort of laid upon you, and they're just there. And if there's suffering, there's badness somewhere out in the world, that it's your job to go out there and serve it and do whatever you can to do it. That the primary focus is on, there's some negative out there, and your moral obligation is to go do something about it. And she's pushing very hard against that. There shouldn't be a duty-focused approach. If you're doing something for others, it should be because you expect some value. And it doesn't mean I hold the door for you, and so I expect you to hold the door for me. It's not like that. But you're doing something that advances or in some way embodies something good in terms of advancing your own life. So we kind of want to have both, right? We want to live our lives. We want to pursue things that are important to us. We want to find love, a fulfilling career. We want to go to sushi. Sorry, that's me. But also we have this kind of funny thing. We also want to be moral. And it's super important, I think, to think of yourself as moral. Because often what people will do is if this is the shape of morality, then to hell with morality. But then you start thinking of yourself, maybe not necessarily as immoral, but sort of amoral. I'm living my life in morality, whatever. That's for you people. But I think it's important to be able to think of yourself as good. And so I think there's a real loss there to just toss morality out. But the problem here is the equation of morality with altruism. Most people equate morality with altruism. They have like a frozen concept. It doesn't, it's just they take one form of morality, and it's not the only one. And they take that as morality. So rather than saying, well, there's this problem because there's morality on the one hand, and morality, it gives you certain demands, and then there are the demands that life and happiness require, and they're just sort of at odds. And then you think, well, the problem is morality. The problem isn't morality. The problem is an altruistic conception of morality. I mean, if you talk to the ancient Greeks, these people like Aristotle, I mean, like Alon had pointed out, it's like their view is what is the best conception of life and how to live it. And if you would have told them that that is the moral, they would look at you from another planet. Like, so you're supposed to think about what's important and then like throw it away? Like, why would you do that? What's the motivation to do that? Like, what's in it for you? Now, of course, altruism is like, you can't ask that question. Once you ask that question, you show that you're looking at morality from a non-moral perspective. And non-moral meaning selfish or self-interested. So this is the thing, is that Ayn Rand thinks that morality is essentially a for-profit enterprise. The idea is you're looking to profit from your actions. And it doesn't mean like making a lot of money necessarily, right? You're looking to profit from your actions. You're looking to profit from your virtues. You're looking to profit from the kind of values you're pursuing. And altruism is about loss in the end. And she thinks we need to untangle these issues. Another thing is you might think, well, okay, look, somebody wants to throw away their life. They want to, well, you maybe think that that's a bit strong way to put it, but I think it is. You think somebody else wants to live their life sacrificing for others, like whatever, that's their business, let them do what they want. But it's worse than that, because if you really do think that self-sacrifice for others is the moral, you'll advocate it. You'll support it. You might not be on the streets with a sign, but this is really what's behind, and I think what animates, it's not the only thing that animates it, but it's one of the important things that animates the constant calls for various forms of collectivism, of regarding the individual as the servant of the group, right? Because the individual is supposed to sacrifice for the group. The group is more important. And your role in the community or in a state is to sacrifice. So any form of collectivism, whether it's socialism, it's communism, it's fascism, it's nationalism, any of these kind of things where it's the individual is not what's important. Your own goals and choices and values, that's not what's important, it's the group. And so then that's exactly what the implementation in social political form of altruism. It's sacrifice for the group. So religion's like sacrifice for God. Socialism and communism will sacrifice for the community. Or sacrifice for the proletariat. Or for our people. Or our race. Or our nation. And Yaron will probably say more about that issue. And we're recording this. Okay. What makes me angry about this issue, and kind of it gets me animated about this, is that you have a limited time in life. Okay, it pisses me off. Sorry. That you really do. The older I get, I'm not that old, but the older you get, you've got enough experience where you look back, you can reflect on your life. And like, what have you built? What have you done? Are you going where you want to go? Are you kind of wasting part of your time? Did you get in some go-nowhere job or relationship? Or were you pursuing things you shouldn't have been pursuing? You look back, you say, I got some regrets, but then you learn some, you got some wisdom, and then you're looking forward toward the rest of your life, and it's getting shorter. And you think about, what do I want? What do I want out of it? How am I going to prioritize my time? How am I going to organize my values? And then there was somebody thinking that. They're thinking, yeah, but other people think I should be doing this and giving up these things and sacrificing these things. And Ayn Rand's view is you need to get as far away from that as you can. She thinks, and as we've said this many times here, but she thinks that you need to fundamentally rethink what the nature of morality is. And again, when I say altruism is evil, you're like, evil by what standard? And it's the standard of life. And her view is essentially the evil is the anti-life. I mean, life is the only phenomenon that brings up the whole issue of values. We can talk about that more in the Q&A if you want. The evil is the anti-life, and the good is the pro-life. I don't mean the abortion movement. I just mean that which supports and enhances and sustains human life. And the evil is that which destroys, hinders it, damages it. And from that perspective, altruism is anti-life. It's find what's valuable, find what's important, and surrender it. And Ayn Rand is telling you, find what's valuable, find what's important, find what's life-sustaining, and embrace it. It's about pursuing real goals and achieving them. It's about having a vision of what you want to be in life, what you want to build, and achieving it. Sorry, I was a gymnastics coach. And having a view about what that is, and having a clearer view about what that looks like in your own life. I think it's important to read Ayn Rand's novels. I mean, you've heard this again a bunch of times, but it's worth stressing. Because what she does in literature is to flesh out in concrete form, in detailed form, what a life lived like that looks like, and what a life lived according to like living for others looks like. What some of the moral motivations and the philosophical premises behind the push toward altruism look like, and how they play out in the world, how they play out in life, how they play out in society. So let me just say thank you, because I want to just end it here, because he just told me I got 15 minutes, so I want to save time for questions. So I'll just zip it to the end there. Thanks a lot. Oh, and Ankar is going to be, there he is, joining me for the questions. I guess we got our clicker. Hey, Ankar. Hey.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi.
So happiness is the goal in life, but isn't happiness an emotion? People want to feel happy. They do not just want to think that they are happy. And of course, there may be a wrong or short-term sense of happiness, like I desperately want to eat these 20 donuts, and I'm very happy now, but I'm very unhappy later. My question is, doesn't this mean that reason is, in the final analysis, always subservient to emotion? Because reason can't tell you what makes you happy. You have to feel happiness. Reason can just tell you how to maximize happiness.
There are a number of issues there to sort out. But one thing is, your emotions give you feedback on your actions and the way you're conducting your life and the goals that you're pursuing based on the values that you hold. And so if something makes you happy, that depends on some of what your values are and what your actions are and so on. And if you have the wrong standards about what kind of values to pursue, you'll get a different kind of feedback mechanisms. You'll feel some sort of positive emotion. Now, it's hard to sort out and differentiate complex emotional states, and I think happiness is certainly one of them. That's a complex state. Between happiness, joy, elation, delight. There are a lot of these things that are difficult. I mean, happiness, as she puts it, is a state of non-contradictory joy. And I think the issue of non-contradictory is that it's a state of joy, but there's no element of it that's working against that joy. So it's not like it's a momentary elation, you'll pay for it later, right? Or it's something you go after that gives you thrills, but then there's a downside to it. But maybe you want to say more about this, but I think that happiness has. I have my own views about this, so I don't know how much of this is objectivism. But when I think about happiness, I think it's definitely an emotional state. But there's more to it than that. I think it's also, how do you put it? You could put it as a state of consciousness, but it has to do with the way one, you know how people talk about flow? I don't know if you've ever heard of this concept. But it has to do with one's functioning and the psychological feedback one gets from one's functioning. And when one's functioning successfully, and one's functioning right, and when one's functioning in a way that's in accordance with reality, and it's in accordance with reason, and it's in accordance with the values that you actually need in life, that there is a psychological component to that. And when you're on the right track and you understand it, I think happiness is what you experience, but if you want to add something.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true, and I think that is the objectivist view. So you classified it, I think, in the question as happiness is an emotion. I don't think it's an emotional state, but that's not the same as saying it's an emotion. It's like anger or frustration or something like that. And one of the ways she described it, it's the successful state of life. So it's a perspective that you have on your life, but it's in part a felt perspective, but it's not only a felt. So to say it's an emotional state there's a felt experience of happiness, but I think there's also a cognitive perspective of I've achieved a successful state of life. And I think self-esteem is very wrapped up in her conception of happiness. And self-esteem is an evaluation of yourself based on certain standards about how you're functioning. And this brings in it's a whole long perspective on your life that I've achieved a successful state of life. So it's not, and she thinks of it as it's a corollary of achieving a successful state of life. The real issue in life is, what is a successful state of life? And how do I achieve that? And in that sense, she thinks reason sets your goals. Your goals are not set by your emotions. Your emotions come from the things that you've learned to value. And they might not actually be valuable. Part of what we've been talking about is you learn all kinds of things that we think, and Rand certainly thought are false. But you still can, then this is what I should be pursuing. And then you have a perspective, okay, that is what I'm going to go after. But your emotions follow from your thinking. They don't drive your thinking. And for anybody, you can then surrender to your emotions. But the primary is, I've learned that I'm supposed to be altruistic, and Mother Teresa's the ideal, and I've learned it. We've gone to school, and they've told me this, and now I've accepted it. Now you might have emotions that I feel guilty if I'm making profits, and so. But your reason is driving that. Your thinking is driving that. Emotions are derivative phenomenon. And so in morality, she does not think that your emotions set your goals. It's your reasoning is setting your goal. And part of what she's arguing is, your reason should set different goals. You should have a different ideal, and you should really think about it, and then set for yourself, consciously, deliberately, through thought, I'm going to have a different ideal. And part of, as Aaron said about her novels, is here's something, like, don't you think Howard Rourke is better to strive for than Mother Teresa or Jesus Christ? And then do it. Build this into your life. Go after this. And that all requires thinking. It doesn't come from your emotions.
Thank you.
Hello. Does selfishness have a boundary? And for example, take Ryan Giggs, a famous football player from Welsh, who had a decade-long affair with his brother's wife. So would that be acceptable? And does selfishness have a boundary? And and another thing I would ask is, you mentioned Peter Singer and his drowning child thought experiment. What would be the objectivist view on that?
Well, I'll take the Singer instead of the affair for now. Okay, do I have to summarize? Let me just respond to you, because this is, if you haven't read the argument or the book, it's different. It's one thing if you notice a drowning child in a pool near you, and it's easy and non-sacrificial. You'd, of course, what would you? Of course, you'd reach in, you'd help the kid, right? You'd even get your shoes dirty or your suit dirty. It's another thing to then extrapolate from that, to say, but there are children drowning everywhere. There's people starving. I mean, they don't have to be drowning literally, but they could be starving, or they don't have a mosquito net and they die of malaria or whatever it is. And so you could say, just as you would help a child in a nearby pond, right? That would be right. That would be right. So we can extrapolate and say you should be doing all these things, right? And I think that's absolutely wrong. It doesn't make any sense. Because in one thing is I get my shoes dirty, and maybe we have to buy a new pair of shoes, and I help a kid. And it's in the service of my own values. This is life. Life is important to me. If your life is important and you know what it means to live, I think other people's life is important to you too. But if you adopt what Singer thinks you should do, it's completely change your life, completely reorient your life, radically lower your own standard of living, and you should all do it too. That's the idea. For the sake of drowning people, starving people, wherever it is, everywhere. It's a complete reorientation of your life against yourself. And that is like, well, I mean, you'd help a kid in the pond right next to you, right? So why wouldn't you live your life like this? Yeah, because it ruins your life. So I don't think that argument makes any sense. The issue of are there boundaries to selfishness? No. Are there boundaries to what's rationally in your own interest, in support of your life? And I don't think there are. You can question which particular activities are in your self-interest, like the affair or whichever, and maybe there are good reasons for the affair. You don't know these people. I mean, maybe you do. Maybe you've read about these. I haven't. But it's like, you don't know what goes on in their life, what their relationships are like, the kind of complications they might have. It's not a puritanical, you have an affair, therefore that's all out. That can't be in your interest. That depends. I mean, often it isn't in your interest. But, yeah.
When reading Ayn Rand, or certainly listening to this talk, it's pretty obvious that altruism is evil. But even if you haven't read or heard of Ayn Rand, altruism at best makes no sense. So my question is, why did it become so popular? And it's not something that happened nowadays, like it's almost 2,000 years of altruist morality. And well, Ayn Rand mentions a little bit in The Fountainhead with Ellsworth too, pretty good, that it's a very good tool to control and exploit other people. But is there maybe another cause that I'm not seeing why people would stick to this evil morality? Or is it really just because it's a perfect tool to control and exploit other people?
I mean, my view, and particularly here we're talking about the history of Western thought, altruism comes from religion. And that comes from Christianity. I mean, essentially it comes from Christianity. And if you look at the history of Western thinking, I mean, this is partly Aaron touched on. The Greeks, when they reached the pinnacle of their achievements, and that's achievements in science and math and medicine and history and in philosophy, I think the best of them don't take altruism seriously. The idea that there's something higher than you to which you owe allegiance and to which you don't count, you engage in self-sacrifice for something supposedly higher, nobler. There's not that kind of view, but you're intellectually an essentially secular. I mean, there's still religion in a certain sense in the Greek world, but not in the way one thinks about Christianity. And Christianity goes to war with the ancient world. They go to war with the Greek and Roman teachings, and in particular, they go to war with Greek philosophy. And it's like if Christianity is going to win, we've got to get rid of the best of Greek philosophy. And then you get a whole view that says there is something higher, and there's a whole other dimension, and there are arguments. And this is the battle in philosophy is between Plato and Aristotle. So two Greeks. I think Aristotle is the best and the most representative of the Greek mind. But Plato's the kind of view that there is some higher dimension. And if you've got a whole culture that now thinks there is this higher dimension, we're subordinate to it, we're somehow at best half imperfect reflections of it, we're trying to get back to it, we're supposed to serve it in some kind of way. And so you get the whole recipe for you don't count, there's something higher that counts, and life revolves around this. And then what you get when you get the Renaissance and into the Enlightenment is challenging of the religious view in all kinds of ways, particularly in science, and Alon brought this up in some of his talk, but you don't get it in regard to morality. What you get is just secularized versions. So you get, there's some higher cause. Okay, we're not going to say it's in another dimension, it's in the distant future, which is Marxism. But it's the same, Marxism is a version of religion, and it's a version of Christianity. And I think Marx knows that. It's part of the reason they rail against Christianity, because it's a competitor. For the same essential view. And you've not had a thinker till Ayn Rand who says, look, we're not going to secularize Christianity. We're going to get rid of it. And that is enormously challenging to do that. There's nobody else who will say that and say we need a better view, and we need to go back, in a sense, to the way the Greeks thought, in the way that they did for the Renaissance and the Enlightenment in regard to science. We need to do that in regard to morality and philosophy as well. So that's my view about why altruism dominates.
Yeah, that's cool.
So just to make sure I understand.
We got 2 minutes left.
Just to make sure, like the major cause is that there was a lack of a complete philosophy.
It's part of it, but there were good things in the Greek tradition, and the Christians won for various reasons, partly because of flaws, I think, in the ancient world.
Thank
but
you.
they won that battle, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Hello. The popular definitions of such terms as egoism or altruism or happiness seem to be very divergent from what Rand proposes. And so my question is, wouldn't it be justified to pick a different term to go with those definitions that Rand suggested in order to avoid confusion? Wouldn't you say that might be reasonable to do?
I think it might serve some sort of short-term purpose, but it wouldn't get rid of the problem. If you wanted to call what Rand thinks of as virtuous self-interest or self-fulfillment or something, and you found out it means what she's saying, oh, you mean selfishness. So you get on that euphemism treadmill, where it doesn't help. The other thing is that dictionaries aren't God. Dictionaries capture the way people use terms. And sometimes the way people use terms, the way they think about, the way they hold them in their minds is screwed up. And she's trying to break off a notion of, she thinks the definition of selfishness should just mean this is the concern for one's own interest. It doesn't come with a moral evaluation. It doesn't tell you what is in your interest. Is it slitting other people's throats or pursuing a career? They're building in a moral evaluation into a concept in a non-neutral way. Yeah, and I don't think there's one concept that captures all the negative things that selfishness tries to capture. In some cases, you're just insensitive. In some case, you're thoughtless. In some case, you're a predator. In some case, you're a criminal. But the idea is to package all that together with concern with one's interests. And she thinks that's a real problem. Yeah. Okay, that's all we have time. We have a panel, though, so don't forget to get back in line.
Thanks.
Sorry, I have a 5-second question. Can I ask?
All right, let's see. 5-second
Do it.
question.
Yeah, first.
Yeah, we probably don't have a 5-second
Can
answer.
you answer me, are you happy?
I would say that's a personal question.
Yes or no?
And the reason why I put it this way is to stress the nature of happiness is not like, how do I feel today? It's an assessment of a life. And it's a view about, like, where am I going? If you ask me, am I fundamentally happy? Yeah. Because I think fundamentally what I'm doing is important. What I'm saying is true. That's what I think, right? And what I'm doing is good. And I'm in a career that's really important to me. I'm working for values that have really changed my life, and I think they should really have an impact on other people. And I think that what's better?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to never miss a video.